delegates of the Federal Convention, notice it's Federal Convention, are scheduled to meet in Philadelphia on May 14th, 1787 for the purpose of revising the federal system of government. Okay, now this is where the important stuff happens right here. The next 4 or 5 paragraphs, which you're going to see, debunk this total fabrication that the states were consolidated into one nation. What you're going to see right here is it was attempted. Virginia, the biggest state, was pushing for a total annihilation of the states. Okay? On May 29, 1787, Edmund Randolph, governor of Virginia, gives a long and detailed speech in which he enumerates defects in the Articles of Confederation. He concludes his remarks by introducing a set of 15 resolutions he hopes the convention will adopt as the leading principles wherein to form a new government. These resolutions were written by James Madison, are known as the Virginia Plan. Now, so Madison, his fellow cohorts in Virginia, wanted to dismantle the federal system of government that the Articles of Confederation had established. Okay? On May 30th, 1787, during the discussion on his resolutions, Randolph candidly confessed that they were not for a federal government. He meant a strong, consolidated union in which the idea of states should be nearly annihilated. On June 19, 1787, 19 resolutions which originated from the Virginia Plan are reported to the convention. The first of these states resolved that it is the opinion of this committee that a national government ought to be established, consisting of a supreme legislative, judiciary, and executive. So you can see what they're trying to do. They want a national government. Everybody consolidated under this one government. On June 20th, 1787, Oliver Ellsworth of Connecticut makes a motion to expunge the word national from the above resolution and retain the proper title of Government of the United States, or Government of the States United, whichever way you want to say it. On June 30th, 1787, Gunning Bedford of Delaware asserts, the small states can never agree to the Virginia Plan. He urges the convention to do what is in our power, amend and enlarge the Confederation, but not alter the federal system. The delegates, after heated debate, which nearly results in a dissolution of the convention, do exactly what Bedford suggests. The word national is removed from all the resolutions, and the proposed Constitution, in its final form, simply revises and expands the federal system of government established by the Articles of Confederation. This is why it's important to know about the Articles of Confederation, because the Constitution is simply an expansion of it. That's all it is. Okay. On June 20th, oh, we did that. That's where we're down to August 6th. On August 6, 1787, the convention agrees that the name of the government being formed will remain the United States of America. It's important. So here we are. The plan to dissolve the federal system of government established by the Articles of Confederation and consolidate the states and their people into a single nation fails. By rejecting the Virginia Plan and the attempt to vest general power in a national government, the states ensure that a separation or division of power between the states and their federal government will be maintained. Now, this now is what I consider to be the most important thing that's not discussed. You talk about states' rights, reserved powers, all these things. What's not discussed is the fact that there's a separation of power between the states and the federal government. So here you go. Here you have the so-called father of the Constitution, who was proposing to consolidate and annihilate the states in the Virginia Plan, is now going to tell you what this separation of powers is. I mean, it shows they had character. I mean, everybody rips on Hamilton, but I'll tell you some of the best writings in the Federalist essays, some of the most accurate ones are by Hamilton. He has some really good stuff in there. Okay, here it is. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, with which last the power of taxation will, for the most part, be connected. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all the objects which in their ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Is that the government that we have operating right now? No, it is not.
We have just the opposite.
That's right. They're doing what they rejected. They're trying to set up a national government and make the states subordinates or a government over states, as opposed to a government between states. Okay. John Jay, one of the authors of the Federalist Essays and the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, explains the separation of power in the New York State Convention debating ratification of the proposed Constitution in 1788. What are the objects of our state legislatures? Innumerable things of small moment occupy their attention. Matters of a private nature which require much minute and local information. The objects of the general, federal government are not of this nature. They comprehend the interests of the states in relation to each other and in relation to foreign nations. The limited powers of the federal government, as stated by Madison and Jay, pertain to external or foreign affairs and relations between the states, while the numerous and indefinite powers reserved to the individual states pertain to the lives, liberties, and properties of the people. In Federalist number 41, Madison takes all of the powers delegated to the federal government and groups them into 6 categories of powers. In fact, if you'll read that essay, and I believe the 4 that follow, he takes these 6 things and he discusses them in a little more detail. But here it is. That we may form a correct judgment on this subject, it will be proper to review the several powers conferred on the government of the Union, and that this may be more conveniently done, they may be reduced to the different classes as they relate to the following objects, different objects. 1, security against foreign danger. 2, regulation of intercourse with foreign nations. 3, maintenance of harmony and proper intercourse among the states. 4, certain miscellaneous objects of a general utility. 5, restraint of the states from certain injurious acts. 6, provisions for giving due efficiency to all these powers. Where do you see anything in there where they can control your life? Not there.
Restraint from certain influences.
Madison's 6 categories of power breakdown is a mirror image of the separation of powers, i.e., the powers delegated to the federal government pertain to foreign affairs and relations between the states. An example of the separation of power can be found in the book entitled The Story of the Constitution, published by the federal government in 1937 on the 150th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution in the Federal Convention. It addressed the question of federal power in the field of education. Keep in mind, this book is published by the feds when FDR was president. Where in the Constitution is there mention of education? Answer, there is none. Education is a matter reserved to the states. Now, with the healthcare debate, change the words.
Yeah.
Where in the Constitution is there mention of healthcare? Answer, there is none. Healthcare is a matter reserved for the states. The federal government, by its own admission, possesses absolutely no constitutional authority over education because education falls in the class or sphere of power reserved to the states. Okay, now this is a little bit tricky. So if you can't follow this, I can clarify it afterwards a little bit better. And I can give you an example. Okay, the separation of power is the original grant of power. When they separated power, when they gave these powers to the federal government, the spheres of power, that's the original grant of power. Okay? The powers delegated to the federal government in the Constitution are the secondary grant of power. A secondary grant of power was necessary to put the original grant of power into effect. All of the limited powers delegated to the 3 branches of the federal government are restricted to and flow from the separation of power because a subsequent delegation of power cannot apply to a class or sphere of power that was not granted in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The three branches of the federal government cannot constitutionally invoke their delegated powers to circumvent the separation of power because a subsequent delegation of power cannot be invoked to exceed the original grant of power. As shown above, there is a wall of separation between the powers granted to the federal government and the powers reserved to the states. The powers delegated to the federal government in the Constitution only pertain to activities on its side of the wall of separation, not to activities on the state's side. The federal government has been systematically dismantling this wall stone by stone and functioning as if the powers enumerated in the Constitution are the original grant of power, not the secondary grant of power. In other words, the secondary powers delegated to the federal government to put the original grant of power into effect are being invoked to circumvent and obliterate the original grant of power contained within the separation of power and encroach on the powers reserved to the states. Okay, I'll stop for a second. I want to give you a little example here. We're going to move into the Bill of Rights. Let me give you an analogy. An analogy would be, let's say you hire a painter and you say, okay, I need my house painted. I'm going to grant you the power to paint the outside of the house. I will retain the power to paint the inside of the house. That is the original grant of power. I have granted power to the painter. I have reserved the power to myself. Then I sit down and I say, okay, in order for you to paint the outside of the house, I'm going to delegate you some additional powers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delegate to you the power to hire subs to do the prep work. I'm going to delegate to you the power to buy the paint. I'm going to delegate to you the power to buy the caulk, etc. What happens now if he takes that original grant of power to paint the outside of the house and says, well, you gave me the power to buy supplies and paint the outside of the house, now I'm coming into the inside of the house. What do you do? What you do is, you do what Steve asked about earlier, and that's where this nullification movement is coming into that you're hearing about. It's coming in because the Constitution is a compact. It's a contract. The parties to the contract are the states. The federal government is the agent. The agent has now usurped power. You don't need a clause in the Constitution. You just simply go back to the nature of contract law. Just like I said, if the painter violates the agreement, I don't ask him to adjudicate the case. I nullify his actions that exceed the original grant of power. And that's where you're seeing on this nullification coming in now. And for those who don't know about it, go to the 10thamendmentcenter.com. They are the leading website on nullification. In fact, they have a nullification tour going on right now, and they just finished up in Arizona last weekend, and I believe May 20th there'll be one in Los Angeles if you want to go. But it's spelled, it's the 10thamendmentcenter.com, not 10. So I would recommend you go there. There's articles up every 3 days maybe. They've got law professors who are leading this movement on the nullification. There's just great material there, and you can participate and comment, ask questions on the blog. It's a fabulous place to go, a lot of resource, and they're becoming very prominent now because the media is attacking them. So that should give you a little something there.